So we are about to get rolling on the Titanic, which many of you know is the longest Lego set ever made. Titanic's got a little more than 9,000 pieces that'll stretch to almost 4.5 feet in length. Now this entire set was built to a scale of 1 to 200. Basically what that means is the dimensions of the actual Titanic, the length, the width, the height, etc., will be about 200 times what we'll build here. Speaking of the actual Titanic, I did want to share a quick fun fact about the cost. So if we go back to 1912, the cost to build the Titanic was about $7.5 million. If you adjust that for inflation all the way to 1997, it would have cost about $125 million to build the Titanic. You may be asking yourself, why 1997? Well, in 1997, the Titanic movie was released, and that movie had a budget of $200 million. So what that means is the cost to build the movie was actually $75 million more than it cost to build the real Titanic, which I thought was fascinating. Real quickly, in terms of build time, while it will take us nowhere near the 3 years that it took to build the actual Titanic, we're still probably looking at a good 15 to 20 hours of build time, so we should probably go ahead and jump in. Here we go. So the idea to build the Titanic was a classic story of competition. In 1906, the Cunard Steamship Company unveiled two new ships, the Lusitania and Mauretania, that were by far the largest and grandest ships on the water. Of course, not to be outdone, competitor White Star Line partnered with their shipmaker to design a 3-ship fleet that would outclass the competition in every possible way. The Titanic was the second of that 3-ship fleet, in between the similarly sized Olympic and Britannic ships. Construction of the Titanic began on March 31st, 1909 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. And when completed in 1912, she would be the largest man-made moving object on Earth. Jumping into the build, how about LEGO's attention to detail in this lounge area we just built, complete with 2 circular center tables, each surrounded by 4 seats, and not to mention the compass sign printed on the far wall. It's fantastic stuff. Shifting gears, check out the 4 boilers at the bottom of this section. So fun fact about those. The boilers needed over 800 tons of coal per day to keep the Titanic chugging along, which is nearly 70,000 pounds of coal shoveled in each hour. Put another way, if you've ever picked up a gallon of milk, from a weight perspective, there was an equivalent of 130 gallons of milk being added every single minute, 24 hours per day, which is why it took 163 men to keep those boilers going at all times. Some of that energy was also used to heat the indoor swimming pool that we just built right here. This swimming pool, which you can see an actual picture of in the upper right, was a very unusual and elite feature on ships at the time and was reserved for first-class passengers only. The closest that third-class passengers got to this were the 2 bathtubs that were shared amongst the 710 of them who paid that lowest fare. Yes, you heard that right, 710 people sharing 2 bathtubs, 1 for men and 1 for women. Now, having only paid between $15 and $40 per ticket, the limited amenities were understandable. First-class passengers, on the other hand, paid anywhere between $150 and $4,350 per ticket in 1912. The most expensive ticket was for one of the 4 parlor suites on the ship, and in today's dollars, those would cost about $125,000. Quick note about the yellow smokestacks you've seen throughout the build. Smokestacks were crucial in releasing the smoke that was produced by the boilers. However, believe it or not, only the first 3 smokestacks were functional on the Titanic. This 4th one we're about to add now was simply put on for aesthetics, most likely to increase the perceived grandness of the ship. I also wanted to speak briefly to the lifeboats that we just added. We all know the story of the lifeboats and that the Titanic was only carrying 20 of the 64 it had capacity to carry. However, it's worth noting that the Titanic was in compliance with regulations which only required it to have 16 lifeboats. Because transatlantic travel had been extremely safe by that time, it wasn't customary for ships to have lifeboat capacity that accounted for every single passenger and crew member on board. Further, the 20 boats it did have had a capacity of 1,178 people, but unfortunately due to logistical challenges, only a little over 700 made it onto one of those lifeboats. In hindsight, they probably shouldn't have canceled the lifeboat drill scheduled for earlier that morning. Here is an image of an actual lifeboat from the Titanic as it was being rescued by the Carpathia, the first and only ship to rescue survivors. As we're finishing up this massive ship, it's worth noting that it was held together by 3 million rivets, one of which you can see in this image here, that were hammered into the ship one by one. The rivets alone made up 1,500 tons of the overall 46,000 ton weight of the Titanic. So after about 18 hours of building, we have finally finished the Titanic. Here's a close-up video of the finished product where you can again see all of the intricate details that were replicated in this model. There were a little over 8,000 photos taken as part of the time lapse. It's about one every 8 seconds. Now, we all know the unfortunate fate of the Titanic, but there are a few interesting things that you may not know. First, it took 73 years to find the wreckage underwater. Now, while that may seem like an incredibly long time, note that the wreckage was found 370 miles off the coast and 2.5 miles underneath the water surface. So you think about the massive area that they had to be searching, especially at those depths. Honestly, it's quite impressive that they found it at all, in my opinion. One other impressive feat that I wanted to call out, Charles Joen, which you can see a picture of right here, he was the chief baker on the Titanic and one of the few that survived without being in a lifeboat. So apparently he drank a ton of whiskey as the boat was going down, and he claims that whiskey kept him warm for the 2 hours or so that he was treading water until he was rescued. Now, I have no idea if there's any scientific basis to that or not, but if you are on a sinking ship in freezing waters, it might be worth a shot. Lastly, I just wanted to close with some context of what all started this, which was the competition between Cunard and White Star. So interestingly enough, those companies ended up merging in 1934 due to financial difficulties, and then were later purchased in 1998 by Carnival, and the Cunard brand still lives on today under that Carnival umbrella, which I thought was very cool. Overall, super fun build, definitely long, but there was enough variety throughout to keep things interesting. Where there was some repetition, it was kind of nice to get a speed boost to get through some of the phases a little more quickly. I hope you enjoyed the build. If you'll do me a huge favor, give the like and subscribe button some actions, and/or drop me a comment of what you'd like to see in future builds. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.